Massive stones were shaped and moved across the ancient world without a single written word. How did this complex knowledge of stone working travel so far, reaching distant shores and isolated mountain valleys long before the age of maps or common languages? By the end of our journey, you will see the scattered ruins of our past not as separate mysteries, but as pieces of a single, interconnected human story. We will follow the silent pathways of maritime explorers and overland traders and confront the puzzling evidence of identical techniques appearing worlds apart. What forgotten connection between ancient builders speaks to you most? A single massive stone, lifted and set into place, creates a ripple in time. This was the dawn of megalithic construction, a term for the awe-inspiring practice of building with enormous stones, often fitted together without a single drop of mortar and shaped with nothing more than other, harder stones. The earliest whispers of this tradition come from a windswept hill in Turkey, known as Göbekli Tepe. Its great stone pillars, carved with intricate animals, were raised over 11,000 years ago. That is a staggering 6,000 years before the first stone was set at Stonehenge. This timeline is not just a list of dates, it places this profound knowledge deep within our prehistory, long before wheels or written words. Archaeologists who study these sites speak of the immense coordination required. Moving a multi-ton block is not merely a test of strength, it is a complex logistical puzzle demanding a shared understanding of leverage, weight distribution, and teamwork. How does a society that has not yet mastered agriculture decide to embark on a project that would challenge modern engineers? The very existence of these stones presents our first great mystery. If these ideas were born in one place, how did they ignite across the globe, appearing in cultures separated by vast oceans and impassable mountain ranges? The map of these ancient sites begins to look less like a collection of isolated wonders and more like a connect-the-dots puzzle with the lines deliberately erased. The vast, empty ocean was not a wall but a road. Long before compasses or detailed charts, ancient mariners set out in wooden canoes and on sturdy rafts, guided by the stars, the swell of the waves, and the flight patterns of birds. They carried with them the essentials for a new life, including something far more valuable than any physical object: the shared knowledge of how to build a world from scratch. This theory of coastal migration suggests that shorelines and great rivers were the original information superhighways, allowing ideas to travel with the current and the tide. A powerful example comes from the Lapita culture, a people who exploded across the remote islands of the Pacific more than 3,000 years ago. We know them by their beautifully stamped pottery, a calling card found on beaches from New Guinea to Samoa. Their rapid expansion speaks of an incredible seafaring prowess, a society built around mobility. They did not just carry pots, they carried the entire cultural toolkit needed to settle Virgin Islands, a toolkit that almost certainly included the knowledge of working stone. When they made landfall on a new volcanic shore, they often replicated the structures their ancestors had built, creating stone platforms for ceremonial gatherings and raised tombs for their honored elders. The very act of colonization involved transplanting architectural traditions across thousands of miles of open water. Their great ocean-going canoes were not just vessels, they were floating libraries of technique and tradition. Maritime archaeology supports this idea profoundly. The discovery of ancient adzes, the stone tools used for carving wood and shaping stone, on islands far from any quarry, points to a transported technology. The sea, once thought to be the ultimate barrier, emerges instead as history's greatest connective tissue, a liquid continent that bound distant cultures together through shared knowledge and daring journeys. But ideas did not travel by sea alone. On land, the exchange was slower, more deliberate, built on the footsteps of countless traders and artisans. Picture a seasonal gathering in a river valley thousands of years ago, a place where different groups met under a temporary truce. Here, in the dust and chatter, obsidian blades were bartered for seashells from a distant coast, yet the most valuable commodities were often intangible. An artisan might demonstrate a new way to shape a stone tool, or a traveler would describe a temple he had seen, built with interlocking stones that needed no mortar. These were the original networking events where knowledge was a currency as vital as any gemstone. Long before the famous Silk Road, these intricate overland networks connected communities across continents, creating a slow but steady web of cultural exchange. The evidence lies in the tools themselves. Archaeologists find specific types of hammerstones, perfectly shaped for pounding granite, or particular sands used as abrasives for polishing jade, hundreds of miles from their source. These were not just trade goods, they were the physical keys to a shared technological language. A trader might carry a bag of this special sand, not for its own value, but for the technique it represented, a technique he could teach or trade at his destination. Look at the parallels between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. Though separated by vast deserts, both civilizations developed strikingly similar fired brick technologies and stone foundations. The precise, standardized bricks of one region echo the methods of the other, suggesting a slow, person-to-person sharing of architectural principles that moved with the caravans. This overland diffusion was a marathon, a patient accumulation of shared understanding that built cultural bridges one technique at a time. Yet this steady, creeping explanation cannot account for everything. What do we make of the ideas that seem to leap across the map, appearing in places with no clear path for contact? Yet this steady, creeping explanation cannot account for everything. What do we make of the ideas that seem to leap across the map, appearing in places with no clear path for contact? Sometimes the human mind arrives at the same brilliant solution in complete isolation. This is the enigma of parallel innovation, a theory that suggests our shared human brain is wired to solve certain physical problems in the same way. Consider the Corbel arch, a simple yet profound method for creating a roof or doorway. Builders gradually stack stones, each layer projecting slightly inward over the one below until the two sides meet at the top. This identical technique was used to construct the magnificent beehive tombs of Mycenaean Greece and the vast, intricate temples of the ancient Andes. There was no shared blueprint, no wandering artisan who could have carried this specific knowledge between these distant worlds. The same puzzle appears with polygonal masonry, the art of fitting massive, irregularly shaped stones together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The result is a wall so perfectly locked that a razor blade cannot slip between the blocks. This method defines the foundations of Inca sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru and can also be found in the Hellenistic walls of Greece and Turkey. The visual resemblance is so uncanny it can feel like a direct connection. So which is it? Are we seeing the invisible threads of a lost global network, or simply the universal fruit of human ingenuity? Experts remain deeply divided. One camp argues that when different cultures face the same fundamental challenges, like gravity and seismic activity, they will independently discover the most stable and logical engineering solutions. The human mind, when presented with a pile of heavy stones and the need to make them stand, will naturally experiment with interlocking shapes and stepped arches. It is a testament to a shared cognitive toolkit. The other camp finds this coincidence too perfect. They point not just to the general idea, but to the minute details of execution, the specific angles and the specialized stone knocking techniques that feel less like a natural conclusion and more like a taught tradition. This debate forces us to question a comfortable phrase that great minds think alike. Is that a sufficient explanation for a global phenomenon? To find more concrete answers, we must move beyond the grand structures and look closely at the humble tools that made them possible. The grammar of stone is written in the marks left by the tools themselves. A universal toolkit refined over millennia speaks to a shared understanding of how to persuade solid rock. It began with the hammerstone, a simple yet perfectly designed tool. A fist-sized piece of dolerite, a stone harder than granite, was used to pound a surface, not to smash it, but to carefully fracture it along hidden planes. This process, called knapping, created a rough shape from a raw block, but the work was far from over. For finer details, the mason would switch to tools of antler or hard wood. These softer implements allowed for a more delicate touch, pecking away tiny fragments to define an edge or create a curve without shattering the stone. The final act was one of pure transformation, using simple sand and water as an abrasive paste. By rubbing this gritty mixture over the surface for hours, sometimes days, a rough rock could be polished to a smooth, almost liquid sheen, capturing the light and the artistry within. The true evidence of a shared language lies in the identical marks these tools left behind. In the quarries of ancient Egypt, the precise patterns of dolerite hammerstone strikes on granite are a mirror image of the tool marks found on Olmec statues in Mesoamerica, carved an ocean and a world away. This cannot be a simple coincidence of method. It points to a specific, orally transmitted sequence, a kind of universal recipe for stone reduction that was passed from master to apprentice. The persistence of this exact toolkit, from the British Isles to the high Andes, across thousands of years, implies a methodology so effective it became deeply embedded in human tradition. The humble hammerstone and the bag of sand were not just implements, they were the physical words of a silent, global conversation, and the monuments they built were the grand sentences composed from that shared vocabulary. The true architectural plans for the ancient world's greatest structures were not found on parchment or clay tablets, but held securely in the minds of master builders. This was a world of mental templates, a living blueprint passed from one generation to the next through an unbroken chain of speech, demonstration, and memory. How could something as complex as a pyramid's perfect slope or a temple's precise alignment be entrusted solely to oral tradition? The answer lies in a sophisticated system of physical aids and standardized rules that made the intangible completely tangible. In ancient Egypt, the foundational unit was the royal cubit, a measurement standardized by a physical rod of stone. Every builder, from the quarry to the summit, worked from this same shared standard, ensuring that every block, every corridor fit together in perfect harmony. To lay out a perfect right angle for a massive temple base, they used nothing more than a simple knotted rope. By tying knots at specific, equal intervals and stretching the rope into a 3-4-5 triangle, they could generate a perfect 90-degree corner every single time. This was geometry in its most practical and elegant form. Across the world in the Andes, the Inca used a different but equally brilliant system of record-keeping and calculation, the quipu. This intricate array of knotted cords was far more than a simple counting device. The colors of the strings, the types of knots, and their positions along the cord could encode vast amounts of information, including the logistical data needed to manage a sprawling construction project, from workforce numbers to material quotas. For the most ambitious projects, builders also created three-dimensional scale models. Archaeologists have found these miniature guides, carved from stone or molded from clay, depicting everything from simple shrines to complex multi-level temples. These models were not just for show, they were the ultimate reference, a physical object that an entire team could gather around, pointing and discussing, to visualize the final goal and solve problems before a single multi-ton stone was ever moved. This entire system was a triumph of knowledge management, but it was also incredibly fragile. Its survival depended entirely on a stable, hierarchical society where a master could spend decades training his chosen apprentices. If that chain was ever broken, if a generation of builders was lost to hardship or upheaval, the living blueprint could vanish in an instant, leaving behind only the magnificent, silent stones as a testament to the knowledge that was once so carefully preserved. The stone itself was not the only thing that traveled. The true vessels of knowledge were the people who understood its secrets, the master masons and artisans whose skills elevated them to a revered status in their communities. These were not mere laborers, they were the inheritors of a sacred craft. In the shadows of the Great Pyramids and the rising temples of the Maya, these specialists formed the world's first professional guilds. Their knowledge was considered a divine gift, a power granted by the gods to shape the very bones of the earth. This sacred status created a closed and protected community. Techniques were not public knowledge, they were closely guarded secrets, passed down only from master to a chosen apprentice, often within the same family for generations. This system of specialization was a powerful engine for refinement. When a single lifetime is dedicated to the perfect angle of a joint or the precise polishing of a surface, technique evolves from a simple skill into a profound art form. It allowed for a cumulative knowledge where each generation built upon the discoveries of the last, perfecting methods over centuries. Yet this protective secrecy also meant that the spread of stoneworking knowledge was never an accident. It was a deliberate, controlled process. The movement of these artisans was the single most important vector for the craft's dispersal. When a master mason traveled, whether summoned by a foreign king, sent as part of a trade delegation, or compelled to relocate by the fortunes of conflict, he carried an entire library of technique in his mind and in his hands. His journey and the spread of his irreplaceable knowledge almost always began at the source of the stone itself, the quarry. This was the raw canvas, the place where a mountain was convinced to give up its bones. The quarry was the birthplace of every monument, a place where human will met the unyielding strength of the mountain. Before a single block could be shaped, ancient peoples demonstrated a profound understanding of the land itself, reading the stone like a familiar text. They could identify the hidden fracture lines in a granite face and discern the grain direction that would make a block easier to split or carve. This was not guesswork. It was a sophisticated, accumulated geology passed down through generations. The choice of material was a science in itself. A dense, crystalline granite was selected for its immense strength in load-bearing pillars, while a finer-grained limestone, softer and more uniform, was the perfect canvas for intricate carvings that would last for ages. Their extraction methods were feats of brilliant, practical physics. In the sun-scorched quarries of Aswan, Egypt, workers would cut a line of slots into the hard granite. Into these slots they drove dry wooden wedges. Then they poured water over the wood. As the wedges swelled with the moisture, they generated immense, relentless pressure, forcing the granite to fracture along a perfectly straight, predetermined line. A world away, on the remote slopes of Easter Island's Rono-Roroku, the master carvers used a different but equally clever technique. They would first outline their famous moai statues directly on the volcanic tuff of the quarry wall. Then, using only hand-held basalt picks, they would chip away the surrounding rock, freeing the giant figure from the hillside where it was born. For other stones like limestone, a method of thermal shock was often used. Builders would light controlled fires against the rock face, heating it intensely before quickly dousing it with cold water. The sudden temperature change caused the surface to flake off in a process called spalling, effectively softening the stone and making the rough shaping work dramatically easier. This intimate, global conversation with the Earth's bones was the essential first chapter in every stone-working story. It reveals that the true foundation of these ancient wonders was not just muscle, but a deep, shared intelligence about the materials of our world. The stone was now free from the earth, but the greatest challenge still lay ahead. How do you move a mountain one multi-ton block at a time? The true test of a civilization's ingenuity was not in shaping the stone, but in convincing it to travel. Moving a block weighing as much as 50 tons without the aid of wheels or powerful animals seems like an impossible task. Yet ancient engineers developed a suite of methods so brilliantly simple they feel like magic. The most universal solution was the log roller. A team would lift one end of a massive stone onto a set of freshly cut logs. As the block was pushed or pulled forward, laborers at the back would constantly retrieve the freed logs and run them to the front, creating a continuous, rolling pathway. This method, depicted in vivid detail on the walls of Egyptian tombs, transformed an impossible drag into a manageable, if backbreaking, procession. For even greater efficiency, this system was often combined with a sledge, a wooden platform that distributed the stone's weight evenly. To overcome the immense friction, these sledges were pulled along specially prepared pathways. Archaeologists have found evidence of these trackways near ancient European quarries, routes often lined with wooden rails or lubricated with water and mud to ease the slide. In some cases, they may have used more sophisticated substances like animal fat to create a near-frictionless surface. When the destination was across water, the challenge transformed. The Egyptians were masters of this, constructing massive barges from cedar wood, vessels so buoyant they could carry obelisks weighing hundreds of tons down the Nile. On land, they built causeways of compacted earth and rubble, elevated roads that led directly from the quarry to the construction site, turning a chaotic landscape into a structured highway. These endeavors were never the work of a few. They required the coordinated muscle of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of individuals. A single rhythmic chant was not just for morale, it was a vital metronome that synchronized every pull and push, turning a disorganized crowd into a single, powerful machine. This level of social organization hints at a society with clear leadership and a shared, monumental purpose. The most astonishing aspect of these methods is their longevity. The basic principles of rollers, sledges, and lubricated pathways remain the gold standard for moving massive weight for thousands of years, a testament to their perfect, elegant efficiency. The journey, however, was only half the battle. Once the stone arrived at the sacred site, the final and most delicate operation began. The final act of construction demanded more than strength. It required a kind of three-dimensional intuition. The goal was a perfect seam, a joint between two colossal stones so tight that not even the thinnest blade of grass could find a passage. This was the art of precision fitting, a technique mastered by cultures as diverse as the Inca of the Andes and the stonemasons of ancient Japan. The process began with a technique called dressing. A master mason would take a roughly shaped block and, using simple hammerstones and abrasive sand, would slowly, painstakingly polish the surface where it would meet its neighbor. He worked not to create a flat plane, but a complex topography of subtle convexities and concavities. The true test was iterative trial and error. The masons would repeatedly attempt to fit the block into its designated space, each time noting the high spots where the rock dust was scraped away. They would then grind down only those specific points, gradually refining the contact surface over dozens, sometimes hundreds of attempts. The result was not a simple lock and key, but a complex three-dimensional puzzle where each block was custom shaped for its one and only place in the wall. This method produced structures of astonishing resilience. The famous walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, for instance, have withstood centuries of violent earthquakes that have leveled later Spanish colonial buildings. The secret lies in the joints themselves. Because the blocks are not rigidly cemented together, the energy of a tremor is dissipated as the massive stones shift and settle against one another, then lock back into place once the shaking stops. The entire wall dances as a single, flexible entity. This profound skill reveals a deep, almost instinctual grasp of geometry and physics. These builders understood pressure distribution and angles on an intuitive level, a mathematical genius communicated not through equations, but through the patient, repeated language of touch and sight. It was a knowledge held in the hands and the eyes, a silent conversation between the mason and the stone that resulted in a bond stronger than any mortar. The stones themselves were alive with meaning. A block of granite was not just a weight to be lifted, it was a piece of the eternal earth, chosen for its color, its texture, its perceived spiritual power. The architectural plans for these ancient sites were not merely blueprints for a building, they were maps of the cosmos, meticulously translated into stone. The Great Pyramids of Giza are famously aligned with the cardinal directions with an accuracy that defies simple chance, their sides facing true north, south, east, and west. This was not an abstract exercise in geometry. It was a deliberate act of anchoring the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife to the unchanging poles of the sky. Across the Atlantic, the Great Sun Temple at Machu Picchu features a ritual stone called the Intihuatana, often called the hitching post of the sun. During the equinoxes, the sun sits directly atop this pillar, casting no shadow, in a dramatic demonstration of the Incas' profound understanding of solar cycles. This shared obsession with celestial alignment points to a universal human impulse to connect earthly dwellings with the rhythms of the heavens. The choice of material was equally symbolic. In many cultures, red sandstone was reserved for temples of fire or solar deities, its color echoing the life-giving power of the sun. A green stone like jade might be used for a tomb, symbolizing eternal life and the lushness of the world beyond. This sacred dimension transformed the mason's craft from a simple trade into a form of high ritual. The knowledge of how to orient a temple or select a sacred stone was not public information. It was the protected domain of priests and astronomer priests, individuals who held the keys to both the spiritual and the physical worlds. This intertwining of skill and belief may explain the most puzzling parallel of all, the pyramid. This majestic form, a square base rising to a point, emerged independently in the deserts of Egypt and the jungles of Mesoamerica. While their internal structures differ, their shared symbolic resonance is powerful. For cultures separated by oceans, the pyramid may have represented a cosmic mountain, a man-made peak that connected the world of humans with the realm of the gods. The very act of building it was a reenactment of creation. So when we trace the spread of stoneworking, we are not just following tools and techniques. We are following a constellation of symbols, a shared language of belief etched into the very bones of the earth. The stones were not silent. They were speaking of stars, of gods, and of humanity's place in a vast, ordered universe. What were they trying to say, and who, across the great divides of time and space, was listening? The pyramid form stands as a silent question mark on two different continents. In the sun-bleached deserts of Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza rises with smooth, geometric precision, a near-perfect square base ascending to a point. Its interior is a labyrinth of narrow passages and chambers, built to house the physical remains of a single divine ruler for eternity. Far across the Atlantic, in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan presents a different vision. It is a massive stepped structure, its sides a giant staircase leading to a temple platform at the summit where rituals were performed for the community and the cosmos. One was a sealed tomb, a monument to an individual's journey beyond. The other was a living, breathing stage for public ceremony, a bridge between the people and their gods. Their shared purpose was sacred, but their internal logic and use were worlds apart. The timeline deepens the mystery. The Great Pyramids of Egypt were largely completed over a relatively short, intense period, centered around 2,500 years before the Common Era. The major pyramidal structures in Mesoamerica, like those built by the Maya and at Teotihuacan, flourished more than 2,000 years later. This gap of millennia seems to argue powerfully for independent invention. How could a specific architectural idea lie dormant for such an immense stretch of time before suddenly reappearing on another shore? Yet the similarities are too compelling to ignore. Both civilizations chose this most stable of geometric forms, understanding instinctively that a broad base could support a towering height. Both oriented their structures with breathtaking accuracy to celestial events, anchoring their sacred spaces to the sun, the stars, and the planets. Both projects demanded a staggering level of social organization, mobilizing thousands of workers and a complex logistical network to feed, house, and direct them. This is the core of the debate. One side sees a universal human response to the challenges of monumental architecture and the shared desire to reach for the heavens. When a society seeks to build high and last forever, the pyramid is a logical, almost inevitable conclusion. The other side looks past the general shape to the profound symbolic resonance. The idea of a man-made mountain, an axis linking earth and sky, appearing so vividly in two unconnected cultures, feels less like a coincidence of engineering and more like a shared fragment of a very ancient, deeply rooted human myth. This single architectural icon, therefore, contains the entire puzzle. It shows us that the search for connections is never a simple matter of yes or no. It is a delicate balance of weighing scale against purpose, form against function, and the undeniable power of the human mind to arrive at similar magnificent ends by entirely different, yet equally brilliant means. Our next destination is a place where this mystery reaches its most extreme and isolated form, a tiny island where giants were carved from a volcano and then abandoned, their story lost to the waves. Easter Island stands as a stark monument to the power and peril of isolated knowledge. The great stone moai, their solemn gazes turned inland from the coast, are the product of a society that honed its craft in utter solitude, surrounded by thousands of miles of empty ocean. Their entire story, from creation to collapse, is etched into the slopes of the quarry at Roroku. Here, the island is literally pregnant with unfinished giants. Nearly 400 statues remain in the volcanic rock, captured in every stage of production, from mere outlines to figures nearly freed, their backs still attached to the mountain that bore them. It is a frozen moment in time, a living workshop where the methods of the master carvers are revealed. They used only simple hand-held basalt picks, called toki, to patiently chip away the soft volcanic tuff, gradually revealing the colossal forms hidden within. But the true engineering marvel was not the carving, it was the journey that followed. How did a people with no metal, no wheels, and no large animals move statues weighing up to 80 tons for miles across rugged terrain? The leading theory for decades involved a heroic effort of log rollers and sledges, a method that would have consumed vast quantities of the island's precious timber. Then a more dynamic idea emerged, the walking theory. This suggests the moai were not dragged, but actually walked to their platforms. Teams of workers would have used a complex system of ropes to rock the statue from side to side, inching it forward in a rhythmic, upright shuffle. Experiments have shown this method is surprisingly feasible, requiring far fewer people and resources than dragging. It is a testament to a profound understanding of balance and momentum. Yet this very success may have contained the seeds of a societal undoing. The focus on statue construction, an endeavor that required immense communal effort and resources, may have contributed to the island's ecological strain. The eventual toppling of the moai, a period when the great statues were deliberately pulled down, marks a profound and tragic turning point. It signals a rupture in the social order, a moment when the old beliefs and the authority of the ancestor gods were challenged and overthrown. With that social collapse, the specialized knowledge of the master carvers, the precise rhythms needed to walk a giant, and the sacred rituals of their placement vanished. The chain of oral tradition was broken, leaving behind only the silent, fallen giants and a powerful warning about the fragility of a culture's most complex knowledge when its living bearers are gone. Deep in the humid jungles of Costa Rica, a different kind of stone mystery lies half-buried in the earth. The stone spheres of the Diquis Delta are not massive pillars or towering pyramids, but objects of pure, simple form, so perfect they seem to defy their handmade origins. Ranging from the size of a melon to colossal orbs over 2 meters across and weighing more than 15 tons, these spheres were crafted from a hard volcanic rock called gabbro. The Diquis culture, which flourished from around 800 to 1500 of the Common Era, left behind no written records, only these enigmatic granite balls scattered across former village sites and riverbanks. Their creation was a testament to extreme patience and a refined understanding of geometry. The process began with raw boulders being hammered with other, harder stones in a technique called pecking. This rough shaping was followed by endless hours of grinding and polishing with sand and water, slowly coaxing the stone toward a perfect curve. The final test of their sphericity was likely a simple, brilliant one, rolling the sphere on a flat surface to identify and then grind down any high spots until it ran perfectly true. This was not a random act, it was a taught and practiced art, a skill passed from one specialist to the next, but to what end? The purpose of these orbs remains one of archaeology's most captivating puzzles. Some were found arranged in alignments that correspond to celestial events or the solstice sun, suggesting they were giant calendars etched into the landscape. Others were grouped in patterns near the homes of important figures, possibly serving as powerful symbols of status and authority. Another theory proposes they acted as territorial markers, delineating the lands of different communities. Their silent, perfect forms likely held multiple layers of meaning, a complex code of social and cosmic order that we can only partially decipher. This mastery of symmetry, achieved without modern tools, shows a universal human drive to impose perfect order on a chaotic world. From the perfect spheres of Central America, our journey takes us across the Atlantic to the rain-swept British Isles, where another culture was using stone to map the heavens themselves. While the isolated cultures of the Pacific honed their craft in solitude, Atlantic Europe was weaving a continent-wide tapestry of stone. Stonehenge is not a solitary monument, but the most famous node in a vast network of megalithic sites that once stretched from the sun-baked coasts of Portugal to the misty fjords of Scandinavia. This was not a single empire, but a shared cultural phenomenon expressed through thousands of stone circles, towering menhirs, and enigmatic burial chambers known as dolmens. The scale of this shared vision points to a deep, sustained exchange of ideas across a wide geographic area. One of the most compelling clues to this connection is the concept of the megalithic yard, a proposed standard unit of measurement that appears to have been used in the construction of sites hundreds of miles apart. When researchers surveyed these ancient rings and tombs, they found that their key dimensions often seemed to be multiples of a single length, roughly 2.7 of our feet. This suggests that traveling master builders or a shared system of geometric principles allowed for a common architectural language to flourish. The very stones of Stonehenge tell a story of incredible journeys. The massive sarsen stones were hauled from 20 miles away, but the smaller, distinctive blue stones were sourced from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a staggering distance of over 150 miles. Transporting these multi-ton blocks across such a challenging landscape, involving both overland hauling and river transport, was a monumental undertaking. This was not a random choice of rock. The effort implies that these particular stones held a profound significance, perhaps tied to their origin in a sacred landscape, their unique color, or even their perceived acoustic properties. This determined effort to connect a specific place in Wales with the Salisbury Plain speaks of a continent alive with long-distance connections, where ideas, rituals, and the very materials for their expression were moving along established pathways. The European megalithic tradition presents a different model for the spread of knowledge than the rapid maritime leapfrogging of the Pacific or the isolated innovations of the Americas. It shows a slower, more continuous diffusion, a patient sharing of a monumental vision that bound diverse communities together through a common language of earth and stone. A master builder's entire library existed not on shelves, but in the rhythm of a chant and the plot of a story. In a world without written records, the human voice and the trained memory were the ultimate vessels for safeguarding complex knowledge. To pass down the precise sequence for dressing a multi-ton block or aligning a temple to the solstice sun, ancient cultures turned their technical manuals into poetry. They embedded step-by-step instructions within the fixed structures of epic songs, using rhyme, meter, and repetition as powerful mnemonic anchors. The very rhythm of a work song sung by 100 people hauling a stone sledge could encode the correct cadence for pulling, a vital piece of logistical data that ensured both safety and synchronization. Storytelling provided an even deeper layer of cultural preservation. A myth about a hero who received the secret of shaping stone from a god was not just a fable. It was a memorable container for technical information, wrapping the dry facts of quarrying and fitting in the compelling drama of divine gifts and heroic journeys. This made the knowledge culturally sacred, elevating it from a mere trade skill to a foundational element of a people's identity. The story ensured that each retelling reinforced the method. To forget the steps was to dishonor the hero, to break the sacred chain linking the community to its gods. This oral cloud of epic poems and foundational myths allowed for the astonishingly accurate transmission of information across dozens of generations. A master builder's wisdom, locked into a song his apprentice had to memorize perfectly, could truly outlive him by centuries, yet this beautiful system had one profound vulnerability. It required a stable, uninterrupted chain of teachers and students, a living network of human minds constantly echoing the knowledge forward. Memory alone was not always enough against the unpredictable tides of history. A shifting climate has always been the great driver of human movement. When the rains failed and the rivers shrank, entire civilizations were presented with a stark choice: stay and face an uncertain future, or gather their most vital possessions and search for new land. Among those vital possessions was the intricate knowledge of how to work stone. The great Akkadian Empire, one of the world's first empires, saw its heartland in Mesopotamia wither under a prolonged drought that began around 4,200 years ago. This period, known to scientists as the 4.2 kiloyear event, was a climatic crisis of global proportions. As crops died and the dust rose, the social order that built ziggurats and organized labor collapsed. The people did not simply vanish, they dispersed. Skilled masons and their families packed their specialized tools and their oral traditions, joining the great streams of migrants moving toward regions where water could still be found. This was not a planned expedition, it was a desperate exodus that carried technological seeds into new soil. When these displaced groups arrived in established communities, they brought their unique skills to the bargaining table. A master builder who understood the mathematics of a true arch could offer his services to a local chieftain in exchange for food and protection. The result was a fusion of styles, an architectural dialogue etched in stone. We see this in the archaeological record as new types of monuments appear, blending local traditions with foreign techniques, a clear sign of cultural exchange born from necessity. This cycle of environmental pressure and human movement was a constant, if brutal, rhythm of prehistory. It guaranteed that even the most isolated knowledge would eventually be stirred back into the global pot. Each migration was a living library on the move, ensuring that the art of shaping the earth was constantly tested, adapted, and reborn in new forms. The proof of these ancient methods lies not in a dusty manuscript, but in the sweat and strain of modern hands. Experimental archaeology takes our theories out of the lecture hall and into the quarry, using only the tools and materials available to the original builders. This is how we test the stories the stones tell us. One of the most famous efforts involved the Great Moai of Easter Island. A team led by archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo put the walking theory to the test. With 3 strong ropes and a team of just 18 people, they demonstrated how a concrete replica of a multi-ton statue could be rocked side to side, made to walk its way across the landscape. The rhythmic chant of the team, pulling in careful unison, was not just for morale. It was the essential metronome that kept the giant balanced, proving that a small, organized community could achieve what once seemed to require an army. Across the world in England, another ambitious project sought to raise a full-sized trilithon, the iconic 2 upright stones and a lintel of Stonehenge. Using Neolithic-style tools like antler picks and stone mauls, a crew excavated the massive sarsen stones, shaped them, and then moved them on a sleigh running on a track of greased timber. The final act of raising the multi-ton lintel into place high above the ground was a breathtaking feat of levers, ropes, and a frame lifts, all powered by human muscle. These experiments generate raw, undeniable data. They reveal the exact number of person-hours needed to quarry a single block, the optimal team size for pulling a sledge, and the precise type of soil that offers the least resistance. This scientific approach transforms our educated guesses into physical evidence. The most profound lesson is often the simplest one. Modern engineers might design a complex machine, but ancient builders found power in rhythm, in leverage, and in a deep, patient observation of the natural world. They understood that a rolling log was a temporary wheel, that a muddy path was a natural lubricant, and that a well-told story could be the most durable blueprint of all. The master's hand was the first and most important textbook. An apprentice did not learn from diagrams or lectures, but by watching the subtle angle of a hammerstone, the patient rhythm of polishing, and the critical ear that listened to the sound of a good strike. This intimate, lifelong relationship was the unbreakable chain that carried knowledge forward. A young learner began with the most humble of duties, fetching water for the grinding sand or gathering the right pebbles to be used as hammerstones. This was not busy work. It was the first step in learning the material science of the craft, understanding the properties of different sands and the unique hardness of various rocks. For years, the apprentice's role was one of silent observation and gradual imitation, slowly graduating to holding a tool while the master guided his hands, teaching the muscles the correct pressure and swing. This immersive, hands-on learning encoded the knowledge on a deeper level than mere words ever could. It ensured the apprentice understood not just the how, but the profound why behind each action. Why do you strike the stone at that specific angle? Why do you use a wooden wedge on this type of granite but not on that limestone? The knowledge became intuitive, a fusion of sight, sound, and touch. This slow, patient system was a brilliant engine for cultural memory. It allowed each generation to build upon the last, adding small refinements and innovations to the collective craft. A master might discover a more efficient way to dress a joint, and this new technique would be seamlessly woven into the oral and physical tradition, passed down to the next eager set of hands. It was a process that did not just create competent builders, but true artists who could feel the potential shape sleeping within a raw block of stone. The Great Pyramids rose from the desert not by magic, but by a masterful application of basic physics. The true secret behind moving mountains of stone was the clever use of simple machines, tools that multiply force in the most elegant ways. The lever was the master key for the final, delicate act of positioning. Once a massive block was hauled to its destination, prying it into its exact place with brute force was impossible. Instead, workers would slide a long, strong wooden pole underneath one edge. By placing a fulcrum, a smaller stone, close to the block, and then pushing down on the far end of the lever, a small team could generate enough force to lift the multi-ton stone just enough to slip in a pebble or make a minor adjustment. This process of micro-lifting could be repeated again and again, walking the block forward or rotating it with a patience that feels almost superhuman to us today. This same principle was used globally, from the lintels of Stonehenge to the foundation stones of the great temples in Mesoamerica. To build upwards, ancient engineers turned to the inclined plane, constructing colossal earthen ramps that snaked up the growing sides of their monuments. For the Egyptian pyramids, several ramp theories persist. One suggests a single, straight ramp rising directly from the quarry, growing longer and steeper as the pyramid grew taller. Another proposes a more efficient ramp that spiraled around the structure's four sides, a constant roadway for the teams dragging stones to the summit. The construction of ziggurats in Mesopotamia and the massive platform mounds in North America show this same fundamental understanding. Building a ramp was a massive undertaking in itself, but it transformed the impossible task of vertical lifting into the manageable, if arduous, work of a steady, sloping pull. This intuitive grasp of mechanical advantage, the principle that a machine can make work easier by trading distance for force, was a piece of knowledge that traveled as easily as a sketch in the sand. It was a universal key, discovered and rediscovered wherever humans sought to build beyond their own height. A block of obsidian, black and glassy, was far more than a precious commodity. Its journey from a single volcanic peak to a village 100 miles away carried an invisible cargo, the accumulated knowledge of how to fracture its razor-sharp edges. The silent trade in raw materials was one of the most powerful engines for spreading stoneworking skills across the ancient world. When a community received a new type of stone, they were not just acquiring a material, they were accepting a technological challenge. The traders who brought it were the first instructors, demonstrating the precise angle to strike the obsidian core to produce a perfect blade, or explaining which sandstone was best for grinding it into a polished ornament. This was a continuous, hands-on seminar in geology and physics, happening wherever trade routes crossed. Scientists can now trace these connections with remarkable precision. Through chemical fingerprinting, they can identify a piece of obsidian found in a Turkish settlement as originating from a specific volcano in central Anatolia, proving it traveled hundreds of miles. These are not isolated finds. Vast networks mapped through the dispersal of distinct stones reveal a pre-literate world buzzing with long-distance contact. A beautifully made spear point, crafted from a distinctive flint only found in one region, was not merely a weapon. In the hands of a user in a distant land, it was a three-dimensional textbook. Its shape, its symmetry, and the very way it was knapped held a wealth of information. A local artisan could study it, reverse engineer the technique, and adapt those principles to the local stones available. This process of observation and imitation allowed complex skills to leapfrog across cultural and linguistic barriers, carried on the back of a simple trade good. The stone itself was the message, and its meaning was written in the language of technique. A sacred journey was often the most powerful form of education. Across the ancient world, certain locations were believed to hold a unique connection to the divine, drawing travelers from hundreds of miles away. These pilgrimage centers, like Chaco Canyon in the American Southwest, became bustling hubs where distant cultures converged. A traveler from the northern pueblos, arriving at Chaco's Great Kivas after weeks of walking, would encounter a spectacle of architectural grandeur unlike anything in his homeland. He would see the precise stonework of the core and veneer walls, a technique using a rubble core faced with perfectly shaped sandstone blocks. He would walk along the engineered roads that radiated out from the canyon, straight as an arrow for miles. This was more than a spiritual experience, it was a masterclass in engineering. When the pilgrim returned home, he carried back more than a renewed faith. He carried the memory of those walls and roads, a mental blueprint that could inspire local builders to experiment with new methods. The oracle at Delphi in Greece functioned in a similar way, a magnet for the entire Mediterranean world. Greek city-states, rival kingdoms, and distant emissaries all sent delegations to seek the gods' counsel. While waiting for the prophecy, these diverse groups would mingle in the sanctuary, their artisans and builders discussing the ongoing construction of treasuries and temples. A mason from Anatolia might share a clever scaffolding technique with a stonecutter from Sicily. A sculptor from Egypt could demonstrate a new abrasive for polishing marble. The very act of gathering for a shared spiritual purpose created an unprecedented forum for the exchange of practical knowledge. These centers became living libraries, not of scrolls, but of the latest innovations in stoneworking. The techniques witnessed and learned at these crossroads did not remain there. They traveled back along the very same paths the pilgrims had walked, spreading outwards like ripples from a stone dropped in water. The spiritual quest, in its search for cosmic order, inadvertently became one of history's most effective systems for technological diffusion. These enduring marks on stone are far more than simple decoration. Scattered across every continent, from the sun-baked deserts of Arabia to the deep river canyons of the American Southwest, petroglyphs present a global gallery of human expression. For generations, we have interpreted them primarily as spiritual symbols, hunting records, or tribal narratives, but a compelling new perspective is emerging. What if some of these intricate carvings were actually the world's first technical manuals, a visual language designed to transmit complex, practical knowledge across generations? Imagine a master mason approaching a specific rock panel not for ritual, but for reference. The spirals and concentric circles we often attribute to sun worship could instead represent the rotational force needed to move a massive stone on rollers. A series of dots and lines might not chart a constellation, but detail the optimal spacing for lever points to lift a multi-ton lintel. This is not to dismiss their spiritual significance, but to propose a powerful duality. In a world without parchment or pen, the very landscape became the library, and the stones themselves held the instructions for how to shape their brothers. The challenge for modern researchers is learning to read this language without its original dictionary. Some patterns defy easy categorization. A complex petroglyph found near an ancient quarry in Scandinavia, for instance, shows a sequence of hammerstones striking a rock face at different, precise angles. This could be a symbolic representation of a creation myth, or it could be a direct, step-by-step diagram for fractuating a specific type of granite, a lesson left by a master for his apprentices. In the American Southwest, geometric patterns on canyon walls mirror the foundational layouts of nearby great houses, suggesting the rock art served as a permanent architectural plan, a community's shared vision for their sacred space etched into the living rock. This interpretation transforms these sites from passive art galleries into active repositories of engineering knowledge. The true meaning may have been accessible only to initiates, those who had undergone the years of training to understand the shorthand of the craft. The symbols acted as memory triggers, recalling the chants, the rhythms, and the physical sensations of the work. A single carved line could evoke the precise feel of a rope under tension, while a pecked circle might recall the sound of a perfect strike with a hammerstone. This rock-bound archive challenges us to look deeper. It suggests that the spread of stoneworking knowledge was not merely whispered from person to person, but was also etched into the very bones of the world, waiting for the right eyes to read its silent, practical poetry. A civilization's greatest achievements can vanish in a single generation. The intricate knowledge of stoneworking, passed so carefully from master to apprentice, was always vulnerable to the tides of history. When a society fractures, the first casualty is often its most complex traditions. The great palaces of the Bronze Age Mediterranean, from Mycenae to the Hittite capital of Hattusa, fell into silence around 1200 years before the Common Era. The precise causes are debated, a combination of climate shifts, resource shortages, and widespread conflict that unraveled international trade networks. In the ensuing chaos, the guilds of master masons who understood the geometry of the Corbel arch and the logistics of moving cyclopean blocks were scattered. Their carefully guarded secrets, never written down, were lost in the turmoil. The societies that emerged from this dark age built with smaller stones and simpler techniques. For centuries, no one in the region could build as their ancestors had, a stark reminder that progress is not always a steady climb upward. The same pattern echoes in the jungles of the Maya. Their magnificent cities, with towering pyramids and ornate facades, were largely abandoned over a period of intense hardship, as the social order that coordinated thousands of workers disintegrated. The specialized knowledge of the stone carvers and astronomer priests faded. The ability to calculate the precise alignments of temples or to create the complex stucco sculptures that adorned them did not simply pause, it evaporated. The people moved on, and the forest reclaimed the silent stones, which stood as monuments to a technology that would not be seen again in that land for centuries. This is the fragile balance of a knowledge system built on human memory. It can withstand many challenges, but it cannot survive the breaking of its chain. The ruins we study with such awe are not always a foundation for what came next. Sometimes they are a peak, a technological high-water mark that was reached and then tragically lost, leaving behind a silent question about what else we may have forgotten. So the great mystery begins to resolve itself not into a single answer, but into a beautiful, complex tapestry. We have followed the threads of maritime explorers, overland traders, and migrating master masons. We have witnessed the power of the human mind to independently discover a corbel arch or a pyramid stable form. Yet we have also seen the uncanny repetition of specific tool marks and construction techniques across impossible distances. The truth does not force us to choose one explanation over the other. Instead, it invites us to see a pre-literate world alive with movement and connection, where ideas flowed like water, sometimes in great waves and sometimes in slow, seeping trickles. A new stoneworking method might be born from pure, local genius in one highland valley. That same technique could then be carried by a single traveling artisan to a coastal town, where it was absorbed into the local tradition. From there, it might be taken up by a seafaring culture and leapfrogged across an ocean, only to be independently refined by another isolated society that had already been experimenting with a similar idea. This was not a race with one starting line and one finish line. It was a constant, global simmering of innovation, where sparks of ingenuity could be fanned into flames by contact or could glow brightly in isolated embers. This synthesized view challenges the old debate of diffusion versus independent invention. It reveals a more dynamic reality where our ancestors were both brilliant individual inventors and avid borrowers, constantly adapting and improving upon the ideas that reached them. The scattered ruins of our past are not isolated monuments to forgotten genius. They are the permanent nodes in a vast, ancient network of human curiosity and shared understanding, a conversation in stone that spanned the entire globe. Our journey ends where it began, with a single stone, but now we see it differently. It is no longer an isolated monument, but a single word in a vast, global conversation that spanned millennia. The silent spread of stoneworking knowledge reveals a profound truth about our species. We are driven by an innate need to create, to connect seemingly impossible distances, and to collectively overcome the physical limits of our world. This was not a story of lone geniuses, but of shared ingenuity, a cumulative process where each generation stood on the shoulders of those who came before, adding their own refinement to an ancient craft. The movement of a master mason, the trade of a novel tool, the shared rhythm of a work song, these were the threads that wove a tapestry of technology across continents. When you stand before these ancient stones, you are not just looking at a ruin. You are reading a lost chapter of a global history, a narrative written not in ink, but in skill, perseverance, and a universal human spirit. Let these enduring monuments inspire you to look deeper into the shared mysteries of our past. What connections do you see in the world around you? I would love to hear your own thoughts and theories in the comments below.